Canada's premier MMA organization returns to Ontario for the third time, and as part of the big UFC 297 weekend this week in Toronto, Dana White is going to be doing an episode of Looking for a Fight on this 9-fight card. Obviously, there's a ton of Canadian talent representing, going up against a couple of American veterans, as well as some prospect Canadian versus Canadian matches. But there's a ton of fun fights, and there have been odds released for this card, so we might as well do some quick picks and dive in on some of these matchups. If you are in the Toronto area, I believe all the tickets are sold out, so don't try going to the venue and trying to get tickets at the door. I believe they've even posted on their social media that there will be no tickets on sale at the door. So the best way that you can go about watching it is on UFC Fight Pass. So make sure you guys go check it out. Again, Unified MMA is clearly the best MMA organization in Canada from coast to coast. They go out there and put on premier shows all of the time. I was at their first event in Ontario back in December of 2022, and they put on a phenomenal show at the International Center. They came back again in 2023 in Niagara Falls, another phenomenal event there, and now they're going to Rebel Nightclub in downtown Toronto with a very solid card, headlined by a featherweight title fight, which likely will have the winner signing to the UFC if they have an impressive enough performance. All right, this is going to be a quick picks version of the show, so we're going to rifle through these pretty quickly, touching on each fighter a little bit, but giving some picks and seeing how we can go about it. This is a chalk-heavy card, and honestly, there's only really one underdog that I'm feeling on this card, so you guys can figure that out as I get through it. First fight of the night will be between Firdaus Naimi and Nathan Small. I've seen Nathan Small compete a couple times now. I don't want to call him a journeyman at this point in time. He only has 5 professional MMA fights, but he's a local guy that likes to take whatever fights that he can get. Fighting for BTC, which is another premier Ontario Canadian organization, but he has a 2-3 record. He's athletic, he's explosive, has some decent power in his hands, but I think he's going to be outgrinded by the much better wrestler and grinder in Naimi. Naimi has been making his name on the, I guess you can call it northeast region of the U.S., fighting in Pennsylvania and some of those spots over there, putting together a flawless record through his professional and amateur career, a lot of it having to do with his wrestling background, and I fully expect him to go out there and utilize that against Nathan Small to grind this fight out to get his hand raised. Next up, we got Dorian Dokaj going up against Cal Kostinuik. This seems to be a striker versus grappler matchup. Dokaj, very solid fighter, trading out of, I believe, Extreme Couture up here in Canada. He's a very solid fighter, a grinder. This guy likes to go out there, take his opponents to the ground, and just do solid work from on top and keeping up a pretty good pressure considering how early he still is in his MMA career. Cal might have a slight striking advantage, but I don't think he's going to be able to muster up much of a finish here. I fully expect Dokaj to go out there, grind this fight out, big shots from on top, and possibly getting a finish later on in this matchup. Next up, probably the most intriguing fight for me in terms of the odds here. We got Ryan Yapsam coming in as a, I believe, plus 130, plus 140-ish underdog, going up against Kareem Henyen, another kind of striker versus grappler matchup. Kareem, a flashy striker, likes to use unorthodox maneuvers to try to touch up his opponents, uses a lot of speed and explosiveness early on in his matchups. Has an undefeated record, but I've seen him get grinded out in certain spots, and I think Yapsam, solid BJJ guy in his own right, has the ability to go out and grind out Henyen. So I'm kind of surprised to see Kareem as the favorite in this spot, or as big of a favorite as he is. Obviously, he'll have a clear striking advantage here, but I think if Yapsam can go out there and start getting that grind going, get that cage push going, dragging him to the ground, and then just latching on to certain control positions, dominant positions, he might even be able to snatch up a submission in this spot. So I'm going to go with the underdog here in Yapsam to pull off the submission win. Next up, we got Tom Theocharis going up against Robert Dunn. This seems to be a layup for Theocharis, who has actually fumbled a bag against a very below-average fighter in the past. So it kind of makes me hesitant in terms of trusting him in that minus 500 range. But Robert Dunn, a little bit of a slugger. I believe his main style and background comes from jiu-jitsu, but it seems like he really struggles to get fights into those positions. I think Theo Jaris will be the clearly better wrestler here, which should allow him to dictate where this fight takes place, and from there he should be able to get most of his work done. But again, 8-5 record. He's been clipped and dropped and lost to worse fighters in the past, so I'd rather pass on this fight more than anything. But still, a solid fighter. If he can build a little bit more momentum, he could find himself getting the call up. But again, needs to build that momentum and make it look very good if he's able to get the win this weekend. Or tonight, I should say. Next up, probably the more notable fighters here that people know about. Ricky Bandejas going up against Michael Imperato. For those of you who have heard Imperato's name before, he was actually signed to the UFC years ago, but never got to make his debut as he had run into some trouble. I don't want to get into it too much. Just couldn't get to the cage ultimately, pretty much got cut. He's been trying to still climber his way back to the UFC, but ends up going on hit and misses in terms of the runs that he's been going on. Very inconsistent with his performances. He has a BJJ background, but I don't believe too much in his wrestling game. I believe Bandejas has the clear experience advantage here, and I think he's the better striker and should be able to keep this fight in the upright position where he should be able to outstrike and outwork Imperato en route to a decision victory. Next up, we got Mohamed Addo going up against Chris Chapman. This seems like a fight that's a layup for Addo, who burst onto the scene, I believe, back in December of 2022, where he made his professional debut primarily as a Muay Thai specialist out of Ottawa. But he has rounded out his game very well, putting together good damage and even pulling off a couple of submission victories. I believe that this is a matchup where he can outwork the slugger and the journeyman that is Chris Chapman, and whether it results in a knockout victory for him or a finish on the ground with his improving jiu-jitsu game, I fully expect Addo to control this fight and win this fight pretty dominantly. I don't know if he'll get signed to the UFC considering he's only 3-0, but if he doesn't in spectacular enough fashion, we've seen Dana bring these young guys into the UFC, and Addo is definitely one of the favorites tonight to get signed to the UFC, so keep your eyes peeled for that kid. Next up, we got Pat Pitlick going up against Ryan Leninger. Pitlick was 6-0 at one time, ended up losing a fight where he got choked out, and then returned 3 years later back in December of 2022 where he picked up a knockout victory over tough alum Mike Hill. And this guy comes from a striking background, and the fact that he's 34 years old probably plays against his chances of making it to the UFC, but if he's able to pull off a big knockout here over Leninger, it's possible he could get signed. However, I think he's in for some trouble against the more complete and more active Leninger. Leninger has a great cardio game, and he can take some damage on the feet, which optically may not look good for him should the fight hit the scorecards. But I think he can do enough with his output, his grinding ability, and the fact that he can probably get this fight to the ground and make it look good enough for the judges and get his hand raised by decision here. He's around that -130, -140 range. I don't mind a little shot on him here. My only holdup is the fact that Pitlick hits harder, and Pitlick could possibly make it look better for the judges if he's able to get off on his striking more often than not, and damaging up the face of Leninger, which seems a little bit on the bad side of the optics in terms of how easily he can get cut and look like he's wearing damage. But in terms of a full output and volume type of style, I got to lean with Leninger here to pull off the decision victory. Co-main event. This fight came together slightly on short notice considering all the matchups that we had fall out for this card. There were so many good fights lined up for this card, but unfortunately injuries was plaguing this card. But we got Zachary Powell going up against Mark Hume. Both guys like to take grapple heavy approaches in their fights, but the big difference here is that Hume seems to be the slightly better striker, but also the much bigger fighter here too. I think he has about a 4 to 5 inch height advantage. I don't think he has a huge reach advantage, but I think he's going to be the stronger of the two fighters here. Powell likes to implement a grapple-heavy approach, but I haven't been the most impressed with his ability to thoroughly dominate and control his opponents on the mat. His level of competition has been quite sketchy as well, whereas Hume, I think, has proven a little bit more, and I believe that he's going to be the stronger of the two, which I believe is going to be the main X factor in this matchup. Look for Hume to grind out Powell en route to a decision victory, and I don't know if it's going to be enough for him to get signed to the UFC, but regardless, it should be a good enough win for him here. And I think he's around that -200 range. I wouldn't mind throwing him into a parlay. And then the main event, which is for the unified MMA featherweight title, we got John Wynn going up against Matteo Vogel, who who just recently completed on the most recent episode or recent season of the Contender series. And I thought he won the fight. I thought that was a fight that his control and BJJ domination was enough for him to get his hand raised on the scorecards. Unfortunately for him, the judges scored it the other way. And again, it was a close fight, so you can't be completely pissed off about the result in that matchup. And his opponent didn't even get signed to the UFC either. One of the very few guys out of that entire series that did not get signed. But Vogel props himself up in another solid position to get noticed by Dana White on this episode of Looking for a Fight, and I believe his BJJ advantage is far superior to what John Wynn is going to be able to implement in this matchup. Wynn should have the striking advantage. He has some good power in his shots, and he mixes up the target very well. 2 fights ago, he had a body shot KO, which was very impressive, but I think he's going to struggle with the wrestling and grappling onslaught that Vogel has to bring to the table. Vogel is a very slick and high-level BJJ black belt who should be able to take advantage of Wynn on the mat, and I think it should translate to a finish for him within the first 3 rounds of this matchup. So look for Vogel to secure a submission to get his hand raised and hopefully get signed to the UFC, a place that I truly believe he deserves to be. There you guys go. Quick fire unified MMA 55 breakdowns for you guys. Hopefully you guys enjoy the fights, enjoy the shows, and hopefully we get a couple big winners here to get signed to the UFC and get some more Canadian representation on the worldwide mixed martial arts leader. Make sure you guys check it out. It's on Fight Pass if you're not able to get there live. Shout out to the Unified MMA guys putting on high level and high quality shows every time out. All right, enjoy the fights tonight, folks, and check out the rest of my UFC 297 content. A ton of it has dropped this week for you guys, so good luck on all your action this weekend, and I'll see you guys for the post-fight recap of UFC 297 on Saturday night or Sunday afternoon. See you guys then. Peace.